joining you from occupied coastal Miwok land in the San Francisco Bay Area. I use she, her pronouns. First off, I want to give a shout out to all the kick-ass land defenders and water protectors who are working endlessly to stop Line 3. In the chat, I will share the native land map. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Now I will pass it on to my colleague, Cynthia Papermaster. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this very crucial webinar on the intersection between militarism and climate. I'm she, her. I'm talking to you from Ohlone Territory, Berkeley, California. And I so appreciate you joining us today from all over the world and even all over the, all over the United States and all over the world. Really looking forward to this webinar. I always, in my work, try to bring climate activists together with anti-war and anti-militarism and social justice activists. All of it's connected. And if we work together, our voices will be stronger and our power will be greater. And that's what we really hope that you'll get out of the webinar today. So with that, I would like to introduce a video that Joanna Macy made for us today. We are very grateful to Joanna Macy, who's a world-renowned Buddhist scholar, author, and eco-philosopher whose decades-long project, The Work That Reconnects, has helped thousands worldwide, including me, to get in touch with our understandable grief for the destruction of our environment and harm to all beings, and yet still to live in active hope as we face the 6th mass extinction together. Here's the video. Thank you. Okay, hi, Joanna.
Hi there. I am so happy to be able to join the seminar with you all this morning. I just love it when people get information about our world that they can act on, and that influences their lives and the world too. You know, I just had that experience in my own family. My youngest granddaughter, at the end of her spring semester in college, went up for just 6 days to Line 3 of the Enbridge pipeline in Minnesota. There, you know, all who come to join the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe indigenous people are expected to take part in the resistance from within the worldview of these indigenous tribes, seeing the world as their sacred living mother. And what that happened for Lydia, my granddaughter, was that changed her life. It went to the marrow of her bones. And when she came back to all of us out here for the summer, she knew that she wanted to go back there and spend the whole fall semester there and talked her parents into it. And so much so that her father will be out there too for a couple of weeks. So I love it to be alive in a time when our work for the world brings us out to a fresh and invigorating experience of who we actually are. And that we have the capacity to take in something huge. And that is what we're doing here this morning by looking at the question of the military, our military's effect on climate change and the greenhouse gas emissions that it has been generating all along in incredible, uncounted amounts. They have never calculated. There has been no insistence that they give any reporting. But the understanding is that this must be huge. Now listen to what Barry Saunders said about this. He says, here's the awful truth. Even if every person, every automobile, and every factory suddenly emitted zero emissions, the Earth would still be headed to full speed and head first towards total disaster for one major reason. The US military produces enough greenhouse gases by itself to place the entire globe with all of its inhabitants, large and small, in the most imminent danger of extinction. Now that's not hard to compute or even to imagine when you think of the 800 bases we have around the world and the constant maneuvers, trainings, buzzings, flights, artillery practice, strafing practice, what have you, that goes on as if there were no tomorrow, just going on as if we could afford it, as if it made any sense, as if it was not really suicidal. So this is wonderful, that with the help of World Beyond War and Veterans for Peace, and for giving their example too, and that of other scholars, wonderful lineup this morning, I can't wait to see them. CODEPINK is equipping us and others to bring this up. And where? To the next Conference of Parties, COP26, for the Paris Treaty. And this will be in Glasgow in Scotland, first 10 days of November. This is for the first time. First time this is coming up. And we're going to do it right. And each of us can play a part in it. I'm thrilled. And I expect that you are too.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank all of you for joining this War is Not Green, Elevating the Cost of War to the Planet at COP26 in Glasgow. Showing up is always the first most important thing. So I want to thank Nancy Mancias for all the years of her efforts, both with her work on Divest from the War Machine and her focus on BlackRock, and her work of the last 19 years on War is Not Green, and the brilliant and energizer Cynthia Papermaster, who is giving her whole life to raising up this issue to end war and cultivate peace locally. Because bringing us together today took a lot of effort and work. So I just want to honor you and thank you. And just say, you know, I don't know that you all understand, but like I was in Paris for COP in December of 2015. And we were working to get out the message that war needs to be taken seriously, that it's the greatest cost to climate chaos. And we were allowed on the entire activist schedule one small event that no one attended, called No War, No Warming. That so much effort has gone in from then till now to be able to have this space. And it's wonderful, all the speakers that have come together today, because it's up to all of us to get the depth of knowledge we need to help people understand, to be able to teach, to constantly be able to learn that, you know, how this is a cost to the planet. But, you know, at CODEPINK, it's like war is never the answer. And so we've launched China is Not Our Enemy campaign, because war is, of course, never the answer, but also because now more than ever, we need to be cooperating with China on the future of the planet instead of destroying it by escalating a nuclear war. And one other thing that's very important, and I think that's what's happening with and wonderful about what's happening at COP26 is that for us to have an effect, we need a big tent. And war touches everything. War steals from the people. It steals from being able to transition from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. It steals from our capacity to take ourselves off of oil and onto regenerative energies. So it is touching everything. And coming together today, learning from each other and getting really committed to elevating this issue at COP in Glasgow is super important. And how we bring our connections, our groups, our organizations all together. We have a lot to learn and a lot to teach. And it is about people and planet. And we must stop the destruction of life on the planet and instead create conditions conducive for life. And Madison, who runs the China's Not Our Enemy campaign, is also going to be here posting other things you can do to stop the aggression towards China as part of this effort. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you for all of you for coming together today.
Thank you so much, Jody. We have next on the program the Extinction Rebellion. And I work with Extinction Rebellion here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It is the great worldwide activist climate movement. XR's mandate is to focus on the urgent threat of extinction, to center environmental justice, and to demand immediate action to address the climate emergency from all sectors and institutions, including government, finance, and industry. Leana Rosetti's vision became the striking new Extinction Rebellion mural in Clarion Alley in San Francisco's Mission District. So we're going to watch a little 2-minute video, and then Leana will come on. Thank you.
Apologies, 1 second. Emily, can you just make me co-host whenever you get a chance? Sorry, everyone. All right.
This is our world and she's on fire. Rising more than 2 degrees. Planetary emergency.
Thank you, beautiful people, for coming out today. We are Extinction Rebellion, San Francisco Bay Area.
We believe in the importance and then also power of art in engaging with socially urgent matters.
Oh, it's time we learn to draw down, keep it down.
Look.
Look.
Listen.
Listen.
Decide.
Decide. It's up to us.
And congratulations on a beautiful mural.
Net zero. This world is on fire. This world is on fire.
I really wanted to show something that really impacts people here in the Bay Area. This is not an overwhelming issue that you're helpless in changing.
This is a powerful work that sends an urgent message. What we do today is shaping our future.
We've got solutions that we need.
As we join together, all of it is doable and all of it will lead us to tackling the climate crisis, racial crisis, inequality.
Racial justice is climate justice. Grandkids, our great-grandkids, all the animals on planet Earth, and we are having fun while we're doing it. Join us, we love you.
It's on us to end this fire.
Wow. That was Extinction Rebellion in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I am so pleased to introduce you to Leana Rosetti, the artist. She's a biologist and an artist. She worked for the US EPA for the last 11 years. She's passionate about learning about and protecting the natural world. She joined Extinction Rebellion a couple of years ago and is interested in climate art activism. Leana, so great to have you with us today. Can you say a few words about your Clarion Alley mural? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cynthia. Thanks for inviting me. You know, a couple years ago, I was in a very bad place. I was very sad, grieving, and also very angry about what was going on. And I have to say that this mural, it's sort of a metaphor for, I think, what we all have to do, which is join each other and work together. I couldn't have done it with all the other artists and all of the support that we had. So just a little background on, you know, we wanted to do this mural. I had this idea of wanting to impact people emotionally in a way that you can't really do with, you know, facts and articles. And I thought about here in California how we've really been impacted by the fires, whether your town's actually burned down and you've lost your home, whether you've had to evacuate, or whether you've had to just live in horrible smoke for 2 months and not leave your house. Climate change is really real here. And at the same time, I was seeing it all over the world, right? Places I never thought would be on fire, like the Amazon rainforest, like the Arctic. And I was watching Australia burn to the ground. So all of this stuff is really heavy, but I wanted it to really be heavy to impact people. And then I wanted to turn it into, and we can fight this. And that's where the image of the firefighters and join us and messages of how we can actually do something that isn't just a surface fix, but will actually produce the future that we want. And then depict the world that we love, that we want to protect, and excite people about how precious it is and how important it is that we do something. So that's why we're here, right? And the act of painting this mural with other artists and having people walk by and interact with us while we did it, again, it's all about we're not by ourselves. And once we come together, that's where change happens. And so while I know all these issues feel overwhelming, when we all work on them, they're not anymore. And that's what I also wanted to depict through that mural.
Thank you, Leana. Beautiful mural. I've seen it several times in person, and each time I see it, I just love it so much. The side I love is the life side. The side I don't like is the other side, that's where the world is on fire. Thank you so much. We're going to move on now to the next speaker, and that's Nick Rabb. He's with the Sunrise Movement. Nick is a cognitive science PhD at Tufts University and the founder of, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Poesis?
You got it, yeah.
Oh, Academy, an organization dedicated to thinking about and teaching abstract concepts related to technologies we interact with every day. Okay, Nick is active in the Sunrise Movement, a massive group of skilled and energetic people under the age of 30 that are demanding a Green New Deal. Nick, thank you so much for participating and sharing your research on the intersection of militarism and climate.
Thank you so much for having me, Cynthia, and everybody. I'm like so honored to be here tonight on such a, an esteemed panel. So I'm calling in from Pawtucket in Massachusetts land, and I wanted to talk today about my journey coming to see that climate and militarism aren't just two separate issues, but actually two parts of the same problem. So when I joined Sunrise Movement, I spoke at so many panels and schools and churches and Zoom calls. I talked about how we needed a Green New Deal, right? A just transition. And the Green New Deal was so powerful to me and so many young people because it saw the climate crisis as something born from an interconnected web of problems, right? Racism, colonialism, economic inequality, pollution, lack of democracy, and also emissions, right? And the just transition was so powerful for me and so many people I know because it saw the need for a true revolution in the way that our societies are oriented, right? Changing one that's extractive and competitive and militaristic to one that's sustainable, cooperative, and democratic. And I thought about the climate crisis and its complex interconnections for so long, I started to wonder, how could we have even let the climate crisis happen in the first place? And that answer to that question set me down a path that changed how I saw the climate crisis for good. To save you the time that it took for me to figure out the answer to that question, I'll just tell you that a society that is, not authoritarian or militarized like ours probably wouldn't have let the climate crisis happen, or at least it wouldn't have lasted very long. Right? A large part of the reason that we're in this crisis, which is so hard to combat, is because of an incredible history of extraction and violence. Right? It's the manifestation of a society that's hell-bent on controlling everything, right? People, the planet, resources. So much so that its most powerful people are willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control. And it wouldn't be long until I saw this type of society playing out before my very eyes, which is a little unfortunate. But as I continued organizing, I kind of saw our momentum slowing a bit. Right? I didn't see the Green New Deal and a just transition manifesting. In fact, I actually started to see an entire machine gear up to stop that momentum at all costs. The Green New Deal, which was wildly popular initially among both left and right-leaning people, became the subject of an intense propaganda campaign, and its support literally cut virtually in half. Those who rose up for racial justice last summer, a crucial part of a Green New Deal and a just transition, were shot at by police, right, with tear gas and rubber bullets. I saw my friends shot at. I was scared to death because I saw my own streets in Boston filled with tanks and assault rifles. And even recently in so-called Minnesota, I went down to line 3 and saw police hired by fossil fuel corporations harassing and brutalizing indigenous protesters at the pipeline, right? People who just don't want their land and lives ruined by dirty industry, shot at by hired muscle. And all the while, right, you can't help but not see migrants fleeing from disasters kept in jails, taken from their families, or drowning as nations denied them the right to live. The thing that I saw is that, the Green New Deal and the just transition, that's hard, with their bold visions were missing was a real and honest analysis of what would come to those who try to organize for their realization. But there's a darker side to the climate crisis that's not often talked about, but is intricately intertwined with what we're fighting against. And that's what I like to call the domination crisis. It's this entire set of machinery, right? Systems that are ready to kick in whenever the profits of corporations or the legitimacy of corrupt nations are being threatened. And as I mentioned before, a just transition would see a revolution in the way our societies operate. The powers that be, as they are right now, would not have power in a sustainable society. They've shown that they are willing to fight by any means necessary to hold on to their power. Until we truly confront the system of domination, I argue that the climate crisis will never be able to be truly mitigated. But I want to end on an uplifting note. I realize that was all a lot of doom and gloom, which is, I think it's necessary to see, like Leana was saying, but I think we have to have a so what to it. And I want to say, though this is all true, I wholeheartedly believe that young people, the people who I organize with, and I realize I'm a young person too, are ready to realize this, right? I am so struck all the time by how many people I know, friends of mine, just start to see the effect of US militarism on emissions, pollution, migration, and so much more. There's been so much progress so fast, it literally blows my mind. And so many of us are starting to see imperialism for what it is, right? Continued projects of colonialism, the force of state repression at the behest of private corporations. I argue that we need to support young people as they struggle with this reality and show them that opposing militarism can be done, has been done and can be a central part of a livable future. And I think the seeing what's going on is half the battle, right? Once we start calling out the joint climate militarism crisis for what it is, there'll be no more shadows for the dominators to hide in, right? And we can truly achieve a just future. But we all need to work together to do it. And I know we can definitely do that.
Wow. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Nancy, why don't you come on and introduce the next speaker? Thank you, Nick, so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Nick. And if you all are just joining us, my name is Nancy Mencius. I am a campaign organizer with CODEPINK. And Nick will come back to us. We do have a discussion at the end of our webinar here, but I want to invite our next speaker up, Jeff Conant. He directs the International Forest Program at Friends of the Earth. Friends of the Earth is also part of the BlackRock's Big Problem Network. BlackRock is the largest investor in climate chaos and nuclear weapons. Jeff is the author of Poetics of Resistance and translator of Wind in the Blood, Mayan Healing and Chinese Medicine. Today, Jeff will talk a little bit about climate change, migrant justice, and militarism. So Jeff, take it away.
Hello, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. I am just so thrilled and humbled to be among such a great crowd of peaceniks, if you will. And I hope we'll hear shortly, I expect we'll hear shortly about defunding the Pentagon, which is the single biggest climate criminal on planet Earth. But that's not what I'm going to get into. I'm going to use my time to try to connect some dots, not just between the climate crisis and militarism and war, but between the climate crisis and specifically the war on migrants and the money that fuels both. So just to dive in, one of the basic principles of climate justice is this: exploitation of natural ecosystems and destruction of the climate are intimately linked to and in fact dependent upon the exploitation of workers and human communities. The exploitation of workers and communities is in turn carried out through militarism in all its forms. As we all know, the leading driver of the climate crisis is the extraction and combustion of fossil fuels. We know the companies implicated here: ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, Total, etc. The next leading driver, second only to fossil fuel consumption, is the wholesale destruction of forests and other natural ecosystems. Global deforestation, which is basically the area where I work, is largely driven by industrial agriculture and our deeply broken food system. Some companies implicated here include familiar names like Cargill, Archer Daniels, Midland, Bunge, some of the big ag companies, as well as the consumer goods giants like Nestle, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, and so forth. In short, in order to decarbonize our economy, we need to transform both energy and agriculture at the same time. And in recent years, the climate justice movement has mobilized to target all of the leading companies in both sectors, but also, and perhaps more effectively, to target the financial sector for its role in financing these companies. And this is key to think about going into COP26, because there's going to be a lot of discussion about climate finance and a lot of financiers making big promises at COP26. In the last few years, networks like BlackRock's Big Problem, which Nancy mentioned, which targets BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager with $9 trillion in assets under management, and Stop the Money Pipeline, are bringing together some of the world's strongest campaign organizations to cut off the financing of fossil fuels and deforestation by JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Liberty Mutual, State Street, Vanguard, and other Wall Street giants. We are making progress, as we've heard a little bit about. Every one of these financiers has made some movement in response to the pressure. We've seen divestments, we've seen increased transparency, we've seen financiers urging their clients and their customers to take responsibility for for climate action. And virtually all of the companies that I've named have now made commitments to achieve net zero emissions over time. Is that enough? No, it's far from enough. These commitments are vague and the targets are way too far off in the future, but they do show us that people power gets the goods. It can get the goods, like we learned from the long fight against the Keystone XL pipeline and the fight against the Atlantic Coast pipeline most recently. When we fight, we win. But while the world's largest financial firms have begun to make vague climate commitments, what they have not yet begun to do is to address the human rights impacts of their investments. And this brings us to a whole other set of companies that deserve our attention. While oil, coal, and gas and big ag devastate the planet through their carbon emissions, their operations also, as we know, routinely violate indigenous people's rights, displace communities from their lands, and unleash violence and criminalization against land defenders. This violence and drought and hunger and climate disaster in turn make life unbearable in many countries and are driving ever-increasing waves of migration. So what happens when migrants flee their countries due to drought, hunger, and violence? They are, of course, forced right into the gauntlet of militarized borders, the growing web of private prisons and detention centers, and the invisible network of surveillance and criminalization that drives it all. And why is this happening? Because rather than building pathways towards climate resiliency and a just transition to a low carbon economy, the primary strategy for climate adaptation taken by many states and many corporations has been to accelerate border militarization and surveillance and criminalization and detention and deportation. In a very real sense, this is climate policy. And I think that's a key point. We call this the border and surveillance industry, or the border industrial complex. Here, the list of companies I'll name is more obscure. Airbus, Booz Allen Hamilton, Core Civic, Geo Group, Palantir, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Unisys. These are just a few of the companies whose business model is to build private prisons and migrant detention centers, to conduct surveillance against communities of color, and to profit from xenophobia, racial policing, and racial profiling. A recent report by the Transnational Institute looked at the financing of the border industrial complex, and a few key points stand out. One is that this sector is experiencing spectacular growth, and no surprise, it seems immune to austerity or to economic downturns. And number two, because of this growth, companies in this sector are very attractive to investors. And what this means is that the very same investors that are financing the pipelines, like Line 3, that are violating indigenous people's land rights in the US, or the palm oil plantations in Indonesia that are destroying the world's last standing forests, are also financing the companies whose business is to facilitate detentions, deportations, and human rights abuses against migrants and refugees. There have begun to be some significant actions to target these companies. Last year, for example, Friends of the Earth and BlackRock's Big Problem partnered with the migrant rights group Mi Gente to pressure BlackRock to divest from Palantir, a surveillance company used by ICE to target, detain, and deport migrants and to terrorize immigrant communities. So far, this campaign has not succeeded in winning divestment, and it's clear that we need to grow our people power in order to win some victories here. So in closing, I'm afraid I don't have an immediate call to action, but I just wanted to provide some food for thought that I hope will catalyze future actions by all of us. As we go into COP26 and as we build into the next stages of our climate movement, and particularly the sections of the movement, if you will, that are about climate finance and about human rights, let's keep in mind that the big investors that we're already targeting for their role in driving the climate crisis, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, Fidelity, among others, are also enabling the companies that profit off militarization and criminalization of climate migrants, climate refugees, and the communities of color who are most vulnerable and least responsible for the climate crisis. At this stage, we're all well aware that we're deep into the climate emergency, and the only way out is to take collective responsibility for defending the rights of those that are most vulnerable, most drastically impacted, and most targeted. And one way to do that is as we fight to defund fossil fuels, to defund deforestation, and to defund the Pentagon, we also need to fight to defund the border industrial complex. So thank you for listening.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jeff, for making those connections between migrant justice, militarism, and climate change. And now we're going to shift gears, and we are going to talk about, you were hoping someone would talk about the Pentagon budget, but we will talk about that now. But what I'm going to do is our next guest, filmmaker Abby Martin is unable to join us this evening. So we at CODEPINK wish her a speedy recovery. But joining us is Mike Prysner. I hope I'm saying that right, Mike. He's the producer of Abby's new film, Earth's Greatest Enemy. Mike is an Iraq War veteran, political activist, producer, writer of the TV documentary and interview series, The Empire Files. So let's take a look at the film trailer, and then we'll hear from Mike. So let's roll it.
There's no longer any debate to be had. Our planet is on a collision course with disaster.
Urgent warnings.
Dangerous, record-breaking heat.
We're now living in the early stages.
Terrifying signs of things to come.
Mass displacement, deaths, and extinctions are already here. Whether the planet can remain habitable for human beings has become a haunting question.
Climate change protests happening right now.
Part of a global call for action.
We know there are many culprits. Corporations, policymakers, mass consumption. But what if there was one single entity that by itself will bring planetary collapse? One single organization, one single enemy that not only produced enough toxic destruction to destroy the planet on its own, but was also subject to virtually no regulations, no oversight, no accountability, and as of yet, no blame. If there was a monster like that, shouldn't it be dragged out of the dark and into the center of the struggle to save the planet?
Thank you so much. Wow. I will turn it over to Mike. And if you could just share a little bit about the film and when we could expect a release of it in the theaters. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First, I want to apologize that I am not Abby. I will humbly try to fill her shoes. But I'm excited that we're showing a trailer here because, of course, everyone here is already conscious and aware of this issue just by virtue of joining this webinar, being involved with the COP26, which is very encouraging to us because we've been planning this project for a little over a year, kind of behind the scenes and kind of like a research and pre-production phase. And, we always anticipated that there would be growing consciousness around this issue, and we wanted to do our best to help push that forward. But it was, I think, very fitting that we started with a video from that great presenter who used the same quote that we did in our movie trailer, which is from Professor Barry Sanders, his book The Green Zone, where he calculated based on the number of Apache helicopters, bombers, bases, and things like that, the amount of carbon emissions the US military was actually producing. And those emissions alone, of course, dwarfing every other country. Not only that, but that on its own would produce enough carbon emissions to cause irreversible climate change if that is left alone and everything else is cleaned up. But an important point is that book came out in 2009. And in 2009, that was a projection. And everyone who's familiar with environmental science knows that the predictions get worse and worse. And what is considered to doomsday one year is considered, not strong enough the next year. And so that is very much true with calculating the amount of carbon emissions from the US. We're, working with Professor Sanders about updating the research and trying to bring it current so we know like the full breadth of the carbon emissions. But, as some other guests have alluded to, it's much more broad than just the carbon emissions. Of course, carbon emissions on their own from the US military is the elephant in the room. And of course, the whole point of COP26, the actions that you're doing, is to highlight the fact that why isn't the military involved, counted in the carbon emissions, not just from the US, but from every other country, in particular, the like imperial junior partners of the US empire. But it's so multifaceted. I mean, other than the carbon emissions, of course, in the trailer, you saw the explosion in the ocean. These are just war games, the US military just testing its missiles and bombs just in the ocean, destroying ecosystems. There was even recently a story of endangered whales being dragged from the hull of a US Navy ship just because they felt like patrolling through this important area. Of course, war, we know, toxic legacies people are still dying from, Agent Orange, depleted uranium, the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Of course, people still dying from nuclear weapons tests in the United States and other countries all around the world. But pollution from the military as well. Of the 1,300 Superfund sites in the United States, which are sites designated by the EPA as being a major danger to public health and requiring a long-term cleanup operation to stop killing people and the ecosystem. Of those 1,300, around 900 or more are from the US military. So well over half. And there's actually hundreds more potential Superfund sites from the US military that the EPA is considering weighing. And that kills people and it destroys ecosystems. Of course, as others have mentioned, just the vast expanse of the US empire, the 900 plus really, and probably 1,000 plus military bases of various sizes, most of which we don't even know about because the CIA or military won't tell us about them. It's not just the carbon emissions from these bases, but the construction of these bases being deeply harmful to pristine ecosystems. It's very exciting that you have a speaker coming up from the Jeju Island struggle. We're, of course, going to be going to Jeju Island and covering this frontline struggle, the destruction of just such important geoparks and such an important ecosystem. Okinawa, Japan, a similar struggle, these rare blue coral reefs that took millions of years to form and can never be replaced, that the US military is just ripping up for the sake of expanding an already behemoth base. Jody mentioned, of course, nuclear weapons being such a threat to life on the planet, the production and transportation of nuclear weapons, the production even of just munitions, of all the bullets and the bombs of the military industrial complex, the environmental impact of just creating those things, let alone just dropping them in a desert somewhere for practice. And of course, it all comes down to this kind of bigger issue of, what is the solution? Is it just putting some solar panels on tanks, greening the military, as we've heard? But I think that the driver is the US as an imperialist country, and the constant drive towards war, the fact that war is profitable. And so that danger is always looming, and the danger of bigger wars. And I appreciate Jody mentioning that, the confrontation that the US is driving with China, like what is the biggest threat in the world right now to World War III starting, which of course would have such a horrible impact on human beings, but of course the long-term survival of humans on the planet. And it's the United States, saber rattling and creating conflict when there would normally be peace and cooperation. And so these are all things that we hope to tackle in this film. That teaser, we wouldn't expect to see it anytime soon because we're just beginning production of it. We're going to Alaska with journalist Dar Jamail in a couple of weeks to start filming the visible environmental catastrophe of the glaciers melting in Alaska. We're going to be traveling to COP26. So everyone here who is going to be traveling to Glasgow for that, we will be seeing you with cameras and hopefully able to talk to you. And that's really why we're excited to be part of this panel, is just to let you know about this project, that it's happening, because the whole point of it is to motivate people to take on this issue, to not only get active in the climate movement, but to specifically target, as I mentioned, this elephant in the room, the US military, but to highlight the grassroots struggles in the frontline communities that are already fighting, and all of you who are already fighting. And so in addition to all this information, of course, that we'll be putting out, and the research we'll be putting into it, and the investigations we'll be putting into it, we of course want to highlight those who are on the front lines of making a change. And the last thing we'll say is the reason that we're doing this film is because we have a great amount of optimism around this issue, a great amount of optimism around the climate struggle. We believe, and I hope you all share this belief, that the movement to save the planet, the climate struggle, is poised to explode. It's encouraging to see all the actions that are happening now, but we anticipate and we believe that they will grow so much larger than they are now as the reality hits people, and as more and more people are pushed into action just by the not common sense, but the understanding that they have to do something because there is no time left. And knowing that this is going to grow and expand because it has to, there's no other option. We want to make sure that this issue, the issue of the Pentagon, the US military, the US empire, and all of the different ways that it destroys the ability of living things on this planet to thrive and exist, we want to make sure that this can be an intervention that puts that at the center. So climate activists are equipped with this, but also environmental organizations that may have not taken on this topic yet. Doesn't mean that they don't want to or are scared to, but they may not have the tools to feel confident in doing it. And so that is the goal of this film, is to shine a spotlight on an issue that is, we could probably all agree does not get nearly enough attention in the climate struggle, highlighting those that are doing the fighting and inspiring others to join them, but overall to give tools to every individual and organization to be able to have the confidence to stand up and fight, in particular around the issue of US militarism and climate change. And make people understand that, the cost of having this vast military expanse, the cost of it is not just our tax dollars. The cost of wars like Afghanistan and Iraq and all these hugely destructive wars, the cost is not just our tax dollars. The cost is the time left we have on the planet to survive and be able to turn this situation around. And so I'm honored to be here with so many other people that we hope very much to be talking to throughout the production of this film, and pooling resources with and planning with. And so there's that website URL is at the end of the trailer, earthsgreatestenemy.com. We would love to, anyone who wants to reach out to us to collaborate, talk more about this. We're very eager to do that and looking forward to being with you on this journey in Glasgow and beyond.
Thank you, Mike, so much for your inspiring words. I hope you can stick around. We're going to have a discussion at the end of the webinar. We do have Professor Lynn Jamieson from the University of Edinburgh with us, so we'll go ahead and make sure we connect you with her. But I'm going to pass it on to Cynthia, who will introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
So I have like a double life. I'm pink and I'm also green. Just sharing that with you guys. It's interesting trying to bring those things together all the time. I have the distinct honor of introducing David Swanson, one of the most important and prolific voices on the planet for ending war. David is an author, activist, journalist, and radio host. He's executive director of World Beyond War and campaign coordinator for Roots Action. He has written at least 15 books. I can't keep track because there are so many books, but they include War is a Lie and When the World Outlawed War, and there are 2 children's books as well. He writes every day, I think. I don't know if he ever sleeps. Thank you, David, for your important work for peace and justice and for joining us for the webinar. Take it away.
Thank you, Cynthia and Jody and Nancy and everyone. I'm going to try and share screen here. Let me know if you're seeing a red image. And I can't recall ever looking forward more to a film than I'm looking forward to that film we just heard about. I hope everybody is a part of it and make sure it succeeds. See if I can get this to go to the next slide. There we go. So this was a fun fact that I just came across recently, that so-called climate change may be blowing up arms depots. It's one of thousands and thousands of similar stories that one would think would be big news. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's not such big news. The news is taken up with people like Kamala Harris telling us the US is still a world leader. Yes, the US is the leader in this environmental destruction, including in resistance to making militaries part of climate agreements, which is why those of us who are in the United States have a particular responsibility here leading up to this global conference. War is generally erased. It's not just erased from climate agreements. If you look at UN international health regulations, militaries are exempt from reporting on the disease pandemics that we're dealing with and have been helping to spread this pandemic without having to report on what they're doing or be held accountable for it. We have Green New Deal plans that don't mention the existence of the military. We have discussions of budgets that don't mention the biggest item in the budget. We have Hollywood movies about the dangers of the forever chemicals that don't mention the biggest spreader of them, polluter of them. We have most candidates for the United States Congress with campaign websites that don't mention the military, peace, war, treaties, the world, the military budget, nothing. Most progressive multi-issue coalitions, most environmental groups, even the reconciliation bill, most progressive bill we've seen in decades, of course, but page 1, it lays out huge military budgets expanding and growing each of the next 10 years. So this is the norm. There's something about the militarism that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to confront it. And so we have to take that on when it comes, I lost the screen, when it comes to COP26. So we have a petition that is at cop26.info that has been signed by most of the wonderful organizations on this call and individuals and groups and individuals from around the world. We're looking for input and volunteers and creative ideas for most effectively delivering the petition in Glasgow. So let me know. The reason, I think we have to be clear, the reason that militaries are left out of climate agreements is because if they were in there to keep the climate agreements, nations would have, and in particular one nation, would have to dramatically scale back their militarism. This is not just where tons and tons of money is going that could be used to address the environment and the climate, but it is also, as we've already heard from a number of people, a major direct cause of the climate destruction. The equivalent annually of 257 million cars on the road by one estimate. Another estimate in 2003 was that 2/3 of the US Army's fuel consumption was in vehicles being used to deliver fuel to wars. This is the madness of it, and we know what the wars are themselves driven by. So I think we have to be aware that as we've already heard this evening, that militarism is not destroying the earth only in the sense of the climate. It is the biggest landholder, all of those bases, all of those Superfund sites that Mike Prysner was mentioning. The US military and other militaries are major destroyers of earth, top polluters of water, top polluters of forever chemicals. We struggle to educate on and to implement laws against war and against genocide. ecocide is a very close cousin of these other two and ought to be recognized and treated as such. So if you go to worldbeyondwar.org/environment, you find fact sheets, movies, books, PowerPoints, all kinds of resources that we hope you will use. There's also this problem that when the military does get mentioned, it either gets applauded, standing ovations for noticing and admitting that there's something wrong with the climate, or it's imagined as some sort of force for combating the collapse of the climate. But the militaries are not to be trusted. They use excuses, including any sort of good deeds, to occupy, to dominate, to kill, to destroy. They do not go after the solutions we want. They go after confronting the damage, not preventing it, and confronting the victims of the damage. Jeff Conant was mentioning the border militarism. This is what we get if we start treating the military as a solution rather than recognizing it as a key part of the problem. And there are two problems. You know, I read a great book recently that never used the word climate change or climate collapse or global warming. Every single term offends somebody. You referred to it simply as the problem. My only objection was that there are two. There are two problems. One of them is nuclear apocalypse. It's exactly as bad as the collapse of ecosystems. It's just faster. And war guarantees both of them. And without war, you wouldn't have the one at all, the risk of nuclear apocalypse, and the other you might not have. If, as Nick Rabb was mentioning, we had a whole different approach to the world, you wouldn't have it. But even just eliminating militarism with our same rotten culture, we would have a much better chance at dealing with the climate. The numbers are almost unimaginable. Earlier this year, President Biden proposed $1.2 billion to be spent on climate aid to poor countries. I noted at the time that this compares to the US government handing out $33 billion in economic aid, plus $14 billion in so-called military aid. These are no factor whatsoever. Things that are not a factor whatsoever in determining where this money goes include the environmental behavior of countries and include the rights of women in countries. I think it's important to note at this point in time. Biden also proposed for the US government spending $14 billion on the climate, which compares rather unfavorably to the $20 billion handed out annually in fossil fuel subsidies, not counting livestock subsidies, never mind the $1,250 billion the US government spends each year on war and preparations for war. The president also said he wanted to reduce US emissions by 50 to 52% by the year 2030, which sounds amazingly better than nothing, but the fine print, the US media did not report. The president actually meant reducing 2005 levels by that percentage. And the totally missing print that environmental activists know from past experience to object to include such slimy practices as excluding from the calculation any emissions from imported goods, from international shipping and aviation, from the burning of biomass, because that's green, plus the omission of predictable feedback loops, plus the building into the calculations, the benefits of imaginary future pro-climate technologies. And then there are the things that even the environmental activist organizations, most of them, tend to go silent on, which often include livestock and certainly include militarism, which not only gets excluded from climate agreements, but also usually from even discussions of climate agreements. So what can we do? There's all kinds of activism we can do anytime locally. We can get local governments to divest from both fossil fuels and weapons at the same time and make an educational proceeding out of it, as we did here in Charlottesville and people have done in other cities. But we can also take part in the Rising Together event on September 19th in New York or anywhere you are in the world. In events in September around the International Day of Peace / Climate Week around September 21st and that week, and events everywhere in November at the time of the events in Glasgow around November 4th and the following days, or if possible, the events in Glasgow. And I look forward to hearing from all of you what you're planning. I think these are opportunities, these global weeks of action in September and November, for every kind of nonviolent, educational, artistic, disruptive, constructive actions. And we ought to get out there and let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Thank you, David. That was so rich. And I just wish we had 100 of you or 1,000 of you. Thank you. I thinking of going to Glasgow. I hope people consider doing it. We've got to act. That's basically it. We've got to do something. So I'm going to hand it back to Nancy now to introduce the next speaker.
So next, I am honored to introduce another land defender, an activist at Jeju Island. Mike is mentioned about this speaker, Sung-Hee from Seoul, South Korea. She is part of the Frontline resistance on the construction of a U.S. naval base. Welcome. And Sung-Hee, and your mic is open and ready for the audience to receive you. Welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, this is Sung-Hee from Gangjang Village, Jeju Island, Korea. Thank you, organizers, for having me in this very, very important and wonderful Zoom meeting. I have been joining the No Jeju Navy base struggle for the last 11 years. There are no clear statistics on the relationship between militarism and the climate crisis in Jeju. However, I hope that this story is a bit helpful for our collective efforts. So let me show you the one image in my background. Okay, here. The Jeju Island, located in the south of the Korean peninsula, has been the barometer of the climate crisis in Korea. According to experts, while the average temperature of the world rose by 0.6 centigrade, Jeju's temperature rose by 1.5 centigrade. Meanwhile, its water surface rose by 23.4 centimeters compared to 55 years ago. It is about 3 times higher than the average of Korea, 8 centimeters, and the world, 7 centimeters. According to the RCP 8.5, it lies up by 48.9 centimeters by 2050 and 105 centimeters by 2100. Being in the middle of a geopolitically critical location, Jeju, with around 630,000 population, has been also threatened for militarization for decades. People have resisted such militarization for a long time. However, with the intensified military tension in Northeast Asia, Jeju, designated as the World Peace Island in 2005, is no longer the Peace Island. Rather, it is the island with militarization threatens lives, masked under the name of peace. Please keep in mind that South Korea is now the 6th military power in the world, as well as the 10th CO2 emission nation in the world. And let me show you another example. Okay, so, okay. While the United States Indo-Pacific strategy draws its alliance with countries like South Korea, the South Korean government has maintained the myth of military power for peace for a long time. And in Jeju, the military does not come alone. It comes with capital under the words of civilian, smart, development, and post-revolution. The Jeju Islanders recently succeeded to make the Jeju Second Airport project, which would be very likely to be an Air Force base, on the brink of falling apart. However, the government and developers still drive for the project, and some politicians, along with the developers, aim to continue to expand and build the connection nodes to the planned area for the second Jeju Airport. My background, you can see, is the photo of trees which were cut to expand such a connection node in 2018. The Jeju Island government is declaring a carbon-free island by 2030 while cutting trees to make such connection nodes. I'll show you one more image. Before the Jeju Second Airport, the Jeju Navy base was completed in 2016. One of the threatened creatures were Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins in the UNESCO-designated Gangjang Sea. They are one of the cetacean species killed by submarine sonar. It is known that a big whale absorbs 33 ton carbons, which amount to the carbons absorbed by thousands of trees. Their lives, along with other sea creatures, have been threatened from warships who go far for war exercise and have been polluting the air and sea. We are also facing the threat by aerospace industry, which will come to Jeju. Space development and militarization will add more pollution to the environment. It is time for people in Jeju to actively connect militarism and climate crisis, thanks to all your hard and wonderful works. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I know it's Tuesday morning there right now, and we're very grateful that you were here with us today. I'm going to go ahead and hopefully you'll stay and for the end of a webinar discussion, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Cynthia. Thank you.
Yes, our next speaker is Dr. Robert Gould. He's an associate adjunct professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. I'm going to cut the introduction short because we're at 6:10 and we still have a lot to go over, but I will introduce Bob. And thank you, Bob, very much for joining the webinar and doing this presentation. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just looking for my presentation. I don't know. I saw it before on the screen when we were practicing. Are you, okay, let me see if this, can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, apologize for my lack of technical expertise here. I'm Bob Gould, and first off, I really want to thank the organizers of CODEPINK for the distinct honor of participating with all the rest of the wonderful panelists today. And at the onset, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Abalone peoples. Our work in PSR is guided by the values and expertise of medicine and public health, and we work to protect human life from the gravest threats to health and survival, which includes, of course, global warming. But from the onset, 60 years ago of our organization's founding, we have continued to be centrally concerned with nuclear weapons and their potential to destroy the world in a flash. Our immediate existential challenge is to get rid of them. We're informed by our experience in the 76th anniversary of the twin bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which by the end of 1945 led to the deaths of over 210,000 innocent human beings by the combined impacts of heat, blast and radiation. And from the onset, we were bent on educating and organizing within the health professional community about the dangers of nuclear weapons, with the, in particular, about 60 years ago, PSR founders published The Medical Consequences of Thermonuclear War that showed the real delusion of ever thinking we could survive a nuclear conflict, where the evidence from Hiroshima showed that all these nurses and doctors perished, the basic hospital systems were down, and we really had to have at the center of our efforts preventing such a thing from ever happening, rather than pretending that we can adequately respond in civil defense measures and such. Our international affiliates within the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War have for decades raised awareness about the environmental consequences of both nuclear war and all other wars. Other speakers, Mike and David, have spoken eloquently about how wars and militaries are the world's single largest polluters, with widespread contamination and health impacts, including high and low level radioactive waste. A good example of this lethal intersectionality is the fact that the nuclear weapons that were used to destroy the Marshall Islands and leave extensive contamination, destruction of ancestral culture, at the same time contaminated naval vessels that were then brought to Hunters Point in southeast San Francisco, an environmental injustice challenged community, to, in the sandblasting and so-called cleanup of these vessels, widely contaminated the area, which is right now still being covered up by the Navy and complicit state and local health and environmental agencies. We still have to worry about the large stockpiles, over 13,000 nuclear weapons, over 90% in the hands of Russia and the United States. But even a regional nuclear war, say in South Asia, between India and Pakistan, employing only 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons, not the big thermonuclear type of weapons, could cause, in addition to over 20 million people dying through the incineration of cities, so much soot and other debris that could block out the sunlight and lead to massive global cooling. This is more accelerated than Carl Sagan's research of decades ago, that could lead to major crashes in corn, rice, and wheat production, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, that could lead up to 2 billion people at risk of severe malnutrition and starvation. Again, this is global cooling, and this is not the way to deal with global warming, which we have other ways to move forward to. Because of these significant health concerns, our affiliates work very closely in bringing these health impacts to the global consciousness through our work with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which we had this wonderful success, having the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, which has now entered into force. Within the United States, we are working together with many other organizations on a grassroots campaign, the Back from the Brink movement, that seeks to reduce our nuclear dangers by renouncing the option for using nuclear weapons first, de-alerting our systems, ending the sole unchecked authority for a president to fire off nuclear weapons, and to cancel the plan to replace our entire nuclear arsenal with enhanced weapons, while actively pursuing a global treaty to ban nuclear weapons. We've had success in a variety of municipalities around the country, such as Los Angeles, the state of California, in terms of both legislative houses endorsing this resolution. And this type of work also was brought to the attention of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which included the Back from the Brink planks within their own statements and pointed to the significant issues involved by continued militarism and the impacts on municipal budgets. Certainly within the last number of weeks, we have become increasingly aware once again of the costs of the war in Afghanistan. Over $2 trillion it costs, hundreds of thousands of people who have died. If we're talking about our military budgets, not the special appropriations for Iraq and Afghanistan, in 2019, the military budget of then $730 billion could have paid for tens of thousands of adults and equivalent numbers of children to have low income health care for 1 year. And returning to the budgetary issues of our nuclear systems, $35 billion, which is actually half of our annual nuclear weapons budgets if you count delivery systems in addition to the warheads, could pay for tens of thousands, given our current COVID crisis, of beds in intensive care units, ventilators, doctors, and nurses. And the great work of Institute for Policy Studies has profiled how much more we spend on quote unquote military security rather than dealing with our climate emergency. Last year, Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan introduced the attempt to reduce our military budget by only about $100 billion, which failed because of lack of courage of anybody but 92 Democrats and 1 independent in the House to support that cut of the National Defense Authorization Act. And we hope that this year we can get much more momentum behind the wonderful initiative, the third Reconstruction resolution that was introduced by Representatives Jayapal and Barbara Lee, and is modeled on the exceptional intersectional work of the Poor People's Campaign, which is attempting to address those 140 million people who are hungry in our country, who go without food, and to deal with this important intersectional movement to lift all boats. In that sense, I want to close on reminding us of the extraordinary courage of Martin Luther King, who in 1967, at the height of the Vietnam War, took enormous criticism for bridging the anti-war and civil rights movement, saying that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And I think we have to take this message to heart as we build the movement that we need to rid the world of militarism and all the deleterious impacts on global warming. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Dr. Gould. I'm going to move us along in our program. I'm mindful of time. Our next speaker is joining us from Glasgow, Scotland via video, although I believe she is actually here somewhere live in person, 2 a.m. Glasgow time. Professor Lynn Jamieson is the chair of the Scotland Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and teaches at the University of Edinburgh. Let's hear from Professor Jamieson. Video.
Hello, I'm Lynn Jamieson. I'm chairperson of Scottish CND. And I hope to speak to you for about 5 minutes. You probably know that Scotland is a population of about 5.5 million people, and that we are quite a small proportion of the population of the United Kingdom. But despite this, we play involuntary hosts to all of the nuclear weapons of the United Kingdom. We were once also involuntary hosts to the United States nuclear weapons. We're in the fortunate position that our current Scottish government seeks independence from the United Kingdom and is willing then to sign the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This puts us in a rather unique situation. If we could achieve Scottish independence, we could effectively disarm the United Kingdom of its nuclear weapons and contribute to global nuclear disarmament, and also to mitigating the catastrophe of climate change. We see nuclear weapons as the kind of ultimate in the squandering mad practices that have created the climate emergency. And as you, I'm sure, know, if even a small number of nuclear weapons were used, it would catastrophically change the climate and cause significant loss of biodiversity. So the whole of Scotland is from one end to the other, from east to west, north to south, covered in military installations and things that are connected to nuclear and also polluting. And the most unacceptable of them all, in our view, is very close to the centre of Scottish population and is the site of the UK's nuclear weapons. The close-up map here is showing you what we call the central belt of Scotland between Edinburgh and Glasgow, where the majority of people live. And it's showing you the site of Faslane, the home port of the 4 UK submarines, and also the former site of the US ballistic missile submarine launched base. That was a deal of a base for Polaris missiles for Britain. And ever since then, the UK's nuclear weapons system has relied on United States missiles. This is our First Minister, the equivalent of the Prime Minister of Scotland. As you know, we have a devolved government that is not able to fully control all matters. It's not responsible for defence or foreign affairs. It's only responsible for domestic affairs. But here is Nicola Sturgeon making a very clear statement that nuclear weapons have got no place in Scotland, and celebrating the coming into force of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And in this context, we are very excited to be hosting COP26 in Glasgow, or I say we, of course it's not us personally, but there will be enormous numbers of Scottish and UK NGOs as well as international communities trying to do things during COP26. As you can imagine, there's already a frenzy of activity. But the 4th of November, that date that is earmarked for particular linking of war, military conflict, and climate change, we are planning an action. We've not yet ready to declare exactly what that is, but you will find details on our website. Also, we are in dialogue with other peace movement and environmental organizations about what we can host, and maybe having space within Glasgow, within Edinburgh, to host other people and their meetings. We hope to host, for example, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom's exhibition, which is making the link between military and climate change. And Friends of the Earth Scotland will also be doing various events, as will many other environmental organizations. So we look forward to seeing you there, and either virtually, not flying, or in person if you are going to get there. And we will do our best to make you welcome. Scottish CND will be launching a film, a virtual tour of the Faslane nuclear base as part of what we do, as well as a specific action on 4th of November. So see you one way or another.
Thank you so much, Professor Jamieson, for that. We are at 6:30 now. We would like to, at the very least, introduce Garett Reppenhagen, the Executive Director of Veterans for Peace. Our original intention was to have a discussion between our panelists, but because the time is so short right now, what do you think, Garett? Could you just take a couple of questions if people want to hang on for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
However I could be of service. We've had some incredible speakers, and the program's been fantastic so far. I'm looking forward to see if we could hear the rest of that presentation somehow. Maybe it can be offered some way on the website or something. But I was a U.S. Army sniper, and I served in Kosovo and Iraq, and have been working on kind of recovering my moral injury and trying to put right back in the world ever since. I've realized that my role in Iraq had a lot to do with, our addiction to oil and exploitation, colonial exploitation of people all over the world. And for that, it's brought me to not only, anti-militarism activism, but also environmental activism and trying to stop the climate crisis. So I have a specific role here. Let's get to it. I think we're going to take some questions from the audience, and I know Sakura, you had a question, I believe, so maybe we could bring you up and you could go ahead and ask the panel your question.
Thank you so much. So my name is Tsukuru Force, LA-based anti-nuclear activist, originally from Hiroshima. So I was so touched today that a lot of conversation about nuclear weapons, what took place. So, but actually, my question is about Okinawa, and not only Okinawa, but this, export. I mean, U.S. military exports their pollution, frankly, all over the world with their military bases. So I'm so glad that I'm so thankful that Choi Sung-Hee spoke today about Jeju Island. We are very much in solidarity with Jeju, people of Jeju. So as a Japanese person who has been speaking in support of Okinawan people, today, thanks to a lot of panelists, the subject of Henoko base was brought up. So it's as you guys know, like it's one of the probably like most ecologically diverse area with 5,300 species and 260 endangered species. And we are destroying the environment. And not only that, in Okinawa, there's a pollution problem with PFAS that's contaminating the water that local people drink and use for agricultural purposes. So I guess my question, when I speak to people in the United States and politicians, even though they show concern about Okinawa, their response has been largely that the Japanese government supports the decision to build a base and keep the bases in Japan. And actually, Japanese government pays for it too. So, the US politicians' response have been that unless the Japanese government comes out to say, we don't want a base in Japan, we really cannot do anything about it. So my question to the panelists is, how, in your opinion, how can we organize, as people of the United States to change the policy of the United States? I mean, is there anything that we can do, or really, truly, there's nothing we can do unless the Japanese government says no?
Oh my God, that's another webinar, Tsukuru. I'm sorry. We really do want to answer that question, but we have one more person who's got a question. Is it okay?
Of course.
Elise, Garett, do you see Elise?
Yeah, Elise is up here. If you want to go ahead and turn on your camera and microphone, and you're welcome.
Yeah, I have them both. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, fantastic. I think this has been a really critical question to address the military's role in climate change. I'm wondering about something though, and it's really, I think that you touched on all the ways in which the military is affecting our environment, the way it's affecting climate change, all the, just the bad things that it does and has done over the years. But people want to feel protected. They feel vulnerable. They're told that they are vulnerable. And even as we talk about more vulnerable populations, people feel vulnerable and they want to feel protected. And I'm thinking about this because I had a conversation with somebody the other day who is African American. He's male. And he talked about wanting to being able to use his Second Amendment rights here in California, but he can't. And so all the criminals have guns, and he wanted to have a gun. He didn't feel like the police protected him, right? So there's a sense of vulnerability that is being fed by the media, by the military, and so forth. And so that the idea of addressing climate change and taking the military's role into account comes up against, yeah, but we need these women and men. And not only that, but we're going to need them more because the resources are going to become depleted. People are going to be coming at our borders. People within our country are going to go across different states. And so we need that protection. And I feel vulnerable. I don't want to, I see that the military has some problems, but I want to make sure somebody can fight for me. And I think that's also intertwined with the issue of nationalism, right? So we're not just talking about militarism, but we're also talking about, I want to make sure that I'm not vulnerable to Russia. I want to make sure I'm not vulnerable to North Korea, and so forth and down the line. And so I'm wondering how climate activists who are interested in the intersection of militarism and war are going to really reach out to people, everyday people, on this issue of their own sense of vulnerability. Even if it's created and manufactured, it's nevertheless real. Thank you.
Those are fantastic questions. So Skuru kind of pointed on, how do we collaborate? How do anti-military organizations and climate organizations and us as activists collaborate? And I think Alicia pointed out like this vulnerability or these myths that we perpetuate to reinforce the military-industrial complex and militarism in general. Who on the panel would like to answer these questions, or should we make Cynthia pick someone? David, I see you.
I want to just do a time check. I'd love for David to answer. Okay. Could I ask Carly and Nancy, do we have a little more time?
Yeah, let's go ahead and answer those two questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. But thank you all so much for your questions. They're very important. We want to make sure they're answered.
Thanks, David.
Well, I just wanted to point out that Russia spends 7 or 8% or shrinking on its military what the United States does. It is not going to take away your freedoms or kill you or anything else. Russia will never kill you. China will never kill you. China spends 14% what the US and its allies and weapons customers spend on militarism. The ludicrousness of these threats is why you are hearing so much about UFOs in the news. They need a threat, but the climate collapse, the destruction of the earth will kill you. It is a real danger. If you look at peacesciencedigest.org, a couple days ago, they put up an analysis of a study that found that exactly proportionate to how many troops each of these junior partners put into Afghanistan to help the war on terrorism, all these dozens of nations, that's how much terrorist blowback they got in their nation. It is counterproductive. It is predictably and consistently counterproductive. You can cheer for the military and support the military, but you are endangering yourself in direct proportion to doing so, not protecting yourself.
Fantastic. Yeah. Nick, it'd be interesting to hear a point of view from somebody who's younger, maybe also taking on maybe both these realities. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I certainly appreciate the framing of the second question. And I think often when we talk about what we want to do in the world we want to build, it is kind of hard to remember where a lot of people are coming from. When I talk about in more length, the thing that I call the domination crisis, these systems that do make us want to dominate each other, propaganda is a large part of that, right? And a lot of people do sincerely believe that they are under threat and that they're in danger, and sometimes even saying, no, you're not in danger. Yeah, who's going to listen to that, right? So I think like there's an interesting parallel that we can think of as well, putting on our organizer hats of, okay, as we're trying to build an anti-militarist movement, how do we meet people where they're at and understand their fear and acknowledge that it's okay to have the fear and know that it's manufactured, and not, sort of split apart the fact that like, we're not trying to say anyone's a bad person for believing these things, and we understand why people would believe these things. And I think that's the first step to sort of like, trying to organize around folks who have a lot of fear. And it's, sort of a core tenet in like abolitionist organizing is the sense that we actually have all that we need to be safe already. And institutions like police actually don't make us more safe.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. I'll kick it back to Cynthia for a time check, and if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I'd like to add that we're really terrorizing a lot of countries in the world. We have economic sanctions on something like 30 countries. Why, I'm just thinking, if we were in a collaborative, cooperative kind of relationship with countries around the world instead of constantly ginning up these enemies so that the weapons industry can make a huge profit. And that's exactly what happened in Afghanistan. All these articles are coming out now, and I'm so glad to see them showing that the real winners of the war on Afghanistan were Lockheed, Raytheon, Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, and on, the ones who really made a profit on the war. That's called war profiteering. Why don't we show our friendship? Because we really do love people all over the world. We don't want to be seen as the world's police, because we were bullies. It's like Martin Luther King said. Thank you, Garett, for giving me an opportunity to say that. And I just really want to encourage everybody, get involved this fall in actions that are happening locally. Go to Glasgow if you can do it. Go to New York for the Walk of Shame that we're going to participate in, so we can really put a spotlight on the financiers of Line 3 and all of the other sort of extractive industries that are going on and really, really killing the planet. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area on the 21st of September, we will have for International Day of Peace, we're going to call it the Weapons Industry Reckoning Day. We have Lockheed here. We're looking for Raytheon here, and we're going to make common cause with you folks all over the country, because you have weapons facilities in your state as well. So thank you. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Garett. Nancy.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I think on the micro level, we see folks inclined to bunker down and prep and prepare for the worst. And those folks are going to die in their bunkers. And that's no way to live. We need to come out of our bunkers. We need to build community. There's community solutions for survival. And we have the courage to do those things, then we can make a difference. That means both combating fear of these myths that perpetuate militarism, and both reaching across to other organizations and working together to collaborate. And that's the only way we're going to do this. Corporations are already reaching across national borders and working together to exploit people. Our governments are working together to perpetuate these military myths in their own nations and create boogeymen across the seas. And, by working together, we can defeat both those problems, I think. So thanks, everybody. And I'll get it back to the moderators here. Thanks.
Thank you, Garett. And yes, we are doing that. We are working across movements. We're working across issues in this webinar tonight, but we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, everyone. We are way over time. Go to codepink.org, find out how to get involved. Cynthia mentioned International Peace Day, just as David has. We are doing an action in New York during Climate Week. If you go to Stop the Money Pipeline, you will see what the climate change activists are doing that week. We will be there on the ground in New York, wearing our pink, saying that war is not green. And you can join us. You can organize a solidarity action in your community on September 21st. You can also organize a solidarity community action on November 4th. Well, we're at the COP26 with Professor Lynn, Jamieson, and Mike and Abby, as we're on the streets of Glasgow, taking the message of militarism and climate change, and war is not green. But thank you all. We are way over time, and check back at YouTube when this video is posted. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We love you. We love you.